And I remember, but this one guy, boy, he was big. Chris, you remember this guy? He was sitting in. It was like he wanted to fight. I don't. It was like he was pushing. He was not going to move. He was not going to move. Chris kept getting a little closer and a little closer, and they were maybe hardly a foot apart. And it was like, you know, it was ready to go down. It was so close. I was kind of hoping it would go down. But anyway.
Okay, yes, we're going to start the show right now. Welcome back. It's Bald Noggins here on a Sunday. This is pre-recorded live on a Thursday.
And then we show up dead on Sunday. That's the way it rolls.
Exactly. Yes. So welcome back. And John is back. Pastor John is back with more fascinating stories. And today John had lived on an island for many, many years, 20, 30 years.
He was a criminal on a penal code.
What was that island? Alcatraz or
Alcatraz?
On Alaskatraz.
The Rock, we would call it.
The Rock. So on Alaska, in Alaska, right? 800 miles from the mainland. Yes. So what'd you do? 20 years there or something?
He was in for 20.
Actually, it was a life sentence. Anything over 2 years in Dutch Harbor is a life sentence. I don't know if you know that.
Or it just feels like a lifetime.
I did 15 life sentences.
Okay. Wow. 30 years. And what you did on the island, which we're going to talk about here briefly, is you started a stranded ministry because we found that many people get stranded on the island. And so you started that ministry. And I was thinking maybe you could start with the most famous bar in the world. The most, I guess not famous. What would be the most dangerous, I guess?
Rough, violent, crazy. I think it was, I don't know if it was Hustler magazine or Playboy or Rock, maybe it was Rolling Stone. One of these crazy magazines did an article and they named it the roughest bar in North America. And there's too many stories. But anyway, yes, very famous for its people coming in that have been on a boat for too long, and they come rocking and rolling in with a whole lot of money. And, you get these people in their late teens, 20s, 30s, and they think they may go down on the next boat and their life may be over. So they would just whip it up in the elbow room in Dutch Harbor.
That's it, the elbow room. And obviously law enforcement, there weren't many cops at the time, maybe 4 or 5. It's been a while.
Not even that. Yeah. Not even. You had one. There was one for a while.
Okay, the native police, or they called native troopers.
They had different variations of police, I guess. And it just was so bad that, you could go there. I was also a corrections officer there for 6 years, and people would be all upset. The police would haul them in after Glenn Herbst, the chief of police, came in 92 and hired more police and just tried to reel it in a little bit. And the people would come back from their court, and you probably saw some of this, Chris. Chris was a police officer there and a detective for a number of years. But anyway, they would be so upset. They'd be going, "What's going on?" I'd say, "What's the problem?" They said, they told me that I can't start a fight. I can't get into a fight in a bar for like 6 years. And they said, we used to be able to come here. We could fight all we wanted. We could make a mess and it was not a problem. And I thought, so your problem is you don't think there's any possible way you can stay out of a fight for 6 years? And he looks at me like, of course not. It's like I was thinking, it's you got to upgrade your lifestyle.
Yeah. You need a little bit of a shift.
They were saying you couldn't drink water for the next 3 months. I mean, I can't go in and
how am I going to survive without?
Yeah, I mean, that was their life. That was a young man's glory is his strength, right?
Right.
The room was all the rage.
The amazing part of the story is you ended up as owner of the bar.
Yes, I did.
So go ahead and just kind of give us
Well,
a thumbnail.
yeah. So anyway, I am fully given over to trying to please the one true God Almighty and His Son Jesus Christ. So the bar was a problem, and so I got myself a jug of oil and one of those the equipment where you spray trees, you hook it to things so you can spray the oil or spray the insecticide around the house. Well, I got some oil and I prayed over it. And I said, God, I'm just going to claim this block for you, because there's screaming and yelling. I mean, anyway, it was big trouble. People are having a lot of fun, right? That was their way of having fun. So I hooked it to my back and I walked around that property and I just sprayed the oil on the road and around the block, claiming it for the Lord. Like, Lord, I just want to claim this for you. I'm going to anoint this ground in the name of Jesus and claim it for you. Not really having a long-term plan, except just wanting to. I was on this island and the Bible is really clear: go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, teaching them everything. So I thought, well, I got to get people on board. So time goes on. I didn't start the Stranded ministry. It had been going on before I got there, but Brian Amber, who you guys know, or Chris knows Brian Amber, I think, Brian and Jamie and all that, he was kind of doing it when I got there, him and Gary LaRue. And so they were leaving and they kind of turned it over to me. At that time, I wasn't the pastor yet. I was the youth director, but they said, we do this. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And that was in 1992 or 3. I can't remember when they left, or maybe it was 4. But anyway, somewhere in there, they turned over the ministry to me. And so I made it a point. If you look at Matthew chapter 25, verse 31 through 46, it talks about Jesus when we all end up before the throne. He's going to separate the sheep from the goats. And to one group, he's going to say, hey, I was hungry, thirsty, naked. I was in prison. I was sick, and you gave me to eat, drink, visited me, whatever. Welcome into the kingdom. And he's going to turn to the goats on his left and said, hey, I was hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, in prison, and you didn't give me anything to eat or visit me or do anything. And they said, Lord, we never saw you. That wasn't us. We would have done it, but we never saw you. And he says, whatever you do to the least of my brothers of these, you're doing it to me. So I took that personally. I still do. That anybody who showed up in need that needed a place, I would treat them like Jesus Christ. Now, that is an impossible task, but it's the way it was. And so anyone who came, and at that time when we started with the Stranded, the church had decided that it wouldn't let anybody in the church anymore because they were afraid the women would be in danger, some young gal walking to the church, and something terrible could happen. So in years past, they had allowed people in the church, but I got involved and they said, no, can't put anybody in the church anymore. So when people would call me in the beginnings, I had nothing. This is the beautiful thing. The best I could do was give them a little bit of my time and a cup of coffee. And so they would call me, hey, I'm in all this trouble. I have nowhere to go. I'm stuck. And they would all have a story that was their own. And I would say, well, let's meet and talk. I think, well, the only thing I can give you is my time. But I'll give you some of my time. I'll buy you a cup of coffee. I can say it is miraculous beyond measure when you give, even though you have nothing to give, you give the nothing you have because it's the loving thing to do. And I would go and I'd sit down with them, talk with them. And every single time we would figure something out, even though I had nothing. Somehow God gets involved when you just take a little faith, a little step of faith with a little bit of love, a little bit of hope. Anyway, all these amazing, I put people all over town. I put people at the processing plants. I put people in bunkers. I put people in cars. I put people in my furnace room. I put people, but we always figured some way out to keep the Mormon dry for the night.
That's awesome.
Anyway, that's so one day I had like 3 or 4 cars in my driveway. I had getting back to the elbow room, and I had extension cords running to all the cars, and I bought little heaters. So I had like 3 or 4 cars. I can't remember. I would use different cars at different times. And Mark Horn was driving. He's a friend of mine, and he pulls in. He goes, "John, what are all these extension cords going to different vehicles?" I said, "Well, I have no place to put people that are stranded, so I just stick them in the vehicles for the night and as long as wherever we need." Well, anyway,
And at this time, the elbow room had closed down.
the
Right.
elbow room had closed down for about a year or two. It had then become the Latitudes for about a year or so. Then Mark Horn bought it for $150,000, and he gave it to me. He said, "John, I bought the Latitude, and I'm just going to give it to you, and do whatever you want with it, except it's got to be related to the stranded people." And I thought, man, that's fantastic. So if you want to hear a lot of that story, the New York Times did an article on that. It's called "Stranded in Dutch Harbor." You can look it up, and they got stranded. The camera team from New York Times got stranded in Dutch Harbor, and they're looking for a story. And somebody said, "Oh, there's a big deal going on with the city and the elbow room," and it's an interesting story. So anyway, you can go New York Times, stranded in Dutch Harbor, and you'll get a little bit of that. In the story, it doesn't conclude. That was in the middle of the mess. That's how I ended up with the elbow room. Now, when people would come, I want to stop right here and say, Christopher,
Right, I'm over here.
right
I'm
there.
the one over here.
He was part of the ministry. Chris would help me in all kinds of different ways. He was a police officer, and I love the moment where I would call. I'd get somebody who would stay, and when they came, I would sit down with them and say, "Okay, let me help you out here. You're stepping into a different paradigm. We're not with the government. We're not with the city. This is what we're doing is completely independent and a nonprofit." And I said, "You coming in, let me just explain to you that you are important. And the reason you're important in my eyes," I tell them, "I'm a Christian. So I believe that you're created by God. And you're not only created by God, but you're created in his image, and you're created in his likeness. So that in itself gives you an intrinsic value that I can't even approach that value. Now, on top of that, something I also believe is that not only are you created in the image and likeness of God, but that God sent his son, Jesus Christ, into this world in the flesh. And he took on all your sin, all your trouble, and he was nailed to a wooden cross with real nails, and he was crucified for you. That, I can't imagine how valuable you are to God. So I'm in an awkward situation. You are a person with unbelievable value. So if I'm a Christian and I believe that, there's nothing I will keep from you, in the sense that I will give you everything I have and do everything I can to treat you right, to take care of you, to help you get to whatever the next thing is you're supposed to get to. Now, obviously, I would tell them, I'm going to fail in my attempt to do this. I'm going to attempt to treat you like Jesus. Obviously, I'm going to fail.
You haven't treated Jesus very well, because
I can't explain that to them, but
We nailed him to a cross.
yeah, wow, yeah, you're going to make it out of this alive. Jesus didn't fare quite so well, but you're making. Here's the
Bad
good news.
news, you may end up nailed to
I'll
a
treat
cross.
you as good as I treated Jesus. The bad news is,
Chris, would you come down? I could use your help right now. And Chris would come down with his uniform, guns, and all loaded for bear. And I remember this one time, I had this one guy that was really obnoxious. I had him for 3 or 4 days. And I would tell them also, as much as I love them, I had some rules. And if they didn't quickly obey the rules, I would throw them out immediately. It's like, I'm going to love you with all I can, but the moment you cross the line, you're out of here, because I've got other people I got to deal with. So anyway, So if I told someone, yeah, you didn't get up this morning to read the scriptures with me, and you know that if you don't get up at a certain time, you can't stay. And they would go, I don't care, I'm staying anyway. And I'd say, no problem. And I'd get on the line, I'd call up public safety. Hey, could you send an officer down here? I have a guy that's not interested in leaving. I want him to leave. Chris would be there with a fellow officer by himself. It didn't matter. Like within 4 or 5 minutes, I didn't have to get into any arguments. And I remember, but this one guy, boy, he was big. Chris, you remember this guy. He was sitting in. It was like he wanted to fight. I don't, it was like he was pushing. He was not going to move. He was not going to. Chris kept getting a little closer and a little closer. And they were maybe hardly a foot apart. And it was like, it was ready to go down. It was so close. I was kind of hoping it would go down. But anyway, and at that moment, I think the guy thought, yeah, I better go. It was that close. And
I remember one night I guess you were on vacation. Ken called and said, "Hey, I got a guy. He's just going nuts. He had thrown a coffee table through the window." So,
now the coffee table was made by the Deadliest Catch crew, and it was made out of planks from a ship. It was It was a big, heavy car. It wasn't some light thing.
This guy threw it through a window?
He threw it through a window.
He threw it through the window out into the lawn, about 10 feet out into the yard.
Yeah.
Just to put the coffee table through the window takes an amazing amount of strength. I think it was demonic. I mean, I couldn't believe how far that coffee table was into the yard. Anyway, go ahead, Chris.
So we were, me and a couple other officers, we went down, and I was part of the ministry, so I had access. So I got front. Well, we stacked on the door. I was going to be in the front, but we had a new guy, of course. Oh, the new guy is a little bit taller than me. We nicknamed him Sprinkles. We put Sprinkles in the front because this is one of his first nights working night shift. It was me and Officer Bliss at the time. We're behind him. So we got Sprinkles in front, and I just opened the door, and we went charge. All three of us stacked, went right on top of the guy, and he was putting up a good fight. Because we ended up fighting in the store, in the living room, fighting into the storage room. It went on for a good 5 minutes, but we did.
Well, you know what the crazy thing is, Chris, you wrestled, and someone trying to restrain you, if you just know how to twist it doesn't matter how big they are. It's very difficult to restrain somebody without like clubbing them, and incapacitating them in some way, like by striking them. It's very difficult. So somebody that's actually strong and knows how to move, it'd take 3 or 4 guys to hold them down.
Oh yeah, it was not a typical night, but many nights were like that.
At the parsonage.
but yeah, this was at the parsonage. So it was a little bit different. I think that was the only time I was involved in a major, throw down, knock out at the parsonage. Yeah.
So
but I remember that.
There, I was sound asleep next door. I heard a little.
Oh, were you away? Were you there? I thought you were on vacation or something.
I was there. I didn't.
You were sleeping.
Slept through the whole thing.
So I slept through it like a baby.
Well,
anyway.
See, there you go. That's your caveat. You're out. Hey, I didn't know Jesus was being treated this way. I was asleep. I didn't know anything.
Like Jesus. We're gonna leave him alone. Jesus gets in a fight.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, he can handle himself.
So the next morning I wake up and I hear that guy's up in jail and whatever, and the hullabaloo. And so I go, so they were releasing him. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to get a hold of him. I'm going to take him out for breakfast and just sit down with him, because I'll send you the picture. I took a picture of him when we were sitting at Ziggy's or Amelia's. I said, I hope you don't mind this. I would love a picture of your face. He'd been diving off from where the dishwasher is, 3 steps onto his face.
Oh,
both eyes black, skin gone here, his face. I couldn't believe it. So he let me take a picture. I'll send you a picture, Chris.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Of what this guy looked like. I said, what happened? I said, when I talked to you, you seemed like everything was fine. He says, well, I went up to the clinic because I was out of a particular medication. He said, I think they gave me the wrong medication. Okay, whatever.
They gave me Oxycontin. They gave me meth. I don't know how that happened.
He was thinking I just took my medication. I
man.
don't know if they gave me something. He didn't remember much of it.
Right. Yeah. They
Man,
all,
oh,
I mean,
man.
most of them had a really good excuse why they're in jail. But,
Good, they gave me the wrong medication.
so yes, there's many good, and we probably could do a whole, whatever year's worth of shows on just the stranded ministry and the people that you encountered, stranded people. And the majority of them were people looking for work. I mean, they were not violent,
Yeah.
offenders. I would say, am I wrong or am I right on that?
Well, I was surprised at the amount of people I would get from jail because
They were violent offenders looking for work.
you get fired. When you lose your job, you lose your housing.
Yeah.
So I would say a third of them probably were people that had lost their housing because they got drunk, they got in a fight, whatever, they broke the rules and they ended up in jail. And once they're in jail, the processing plant doesn't want anything to do with you. So they'd have nowhere to go. So I'd take them in and,
So Mike, you weren't there. Obviously, John and I were there for many years, but you weren't there. Do you have any specific questions for John about that maybe the audience would be wanting to ask?
I think you guys spoke about the thing that was the biggest. I mean, the Elbow Room was one of the roughest bars in the United States, in the 50 states of America. I mean, you're talking about one of the most decorated or well-known places. I mean, if you were into that kind of thing and you told, hey, I've been to the Elbow Room. I mean, it was like an iconic place within the United States that people knew about. So, I mean, I think it's really fascinating how through prayer and just like the way mysterious ways, right, of God's mysterious way, that you ended up with this iconic and turned it into a place of refuge, which it was before, but not in ways that you would claim it for a church or a religious organization. At least maybe not the ones we went with, but others maybe, but it was a real rough and tumble place, and you turned it into a real relevant kind of ministry that even the church. I mean, that's another thing I think it's fascinating. I don't mean to harp on the church, but I find it fascinating sometimes how the very organizations that are supposed to be upholding and endorsing this kind of thing have a hard time applying it. And I think, it's not always like for a like some evil purpose. There's always a legitimate reason, safety issues, and some of those things are legitimate, but it just interests me how sometimes, these ministries pop up when the organized organizations kind of fail and kind of aren't able to provide that thing. It's cool how this kind of popped in and you took it over, John. It's really powerful.
Yeah, it's pretty.
So I would go ahead,
when
John.
we created the Alexandria House, we couldn't connect it with the church. We had to make it completely separate simply because I leave, the next pastor comes in, they don't want to have anything to do with the stranded ministry, and the thing shut down. So we had to make it completely independent from the church, even though the church was involved. We had that way anybody else come in, it's still a completely separate thing, and it'll continue in perpetuity, hopefully, for what it was created for.
And just to clarify for those listening or watching, I went from the Elbow Room through the Latitudes and maybe a couple other names, but now it is the Alexandria House, and it's still almost exactly the same as it was when it was originally built. I know you and I kind of put in a foundation, and we did a lot of different work to renovate it interior, but it's actually a beautiful, home now.
People walk in and they go, this has got to be the nicest place in Unalaska Dutch Harbor. I mean, we worked really hard. It was all volunteer, the whole thing. It was given to us, but I had no money. No one really, there's people out there that have a lot of money. I had no money to speak of. But over the course of maybe 3 years, I think, and about $140,000, it was transformed. Like the exterior, not so much. Well, to some degree, it has the same footprint, but the interior now we can't put stranded people in it still. So basically what it does, it's amazing how it's an Airbnb, that all the money that we get from the Airbnb goes into an account, and we're still flying people off the island, putting people in hotels. We're still doing all that. Finally, we have some money to do that. I mean, it's like where before it was like, I remember one day, I remember, I think it was Pack Steve told me that they would give me a room in their bunkhouse that I could put stranded people in. That impacted me. I remember, man, just driving down the road saying, thank you, Jesus. I couldn't say thank you, Jesus, enough. I had, we assume responsibility. I said, and I can honestly say that in all the years I was involved, and we figured about 1,000 people, 1,000 stranded people we helped, never turned anybody who was sober away.
Wow.
Now, I turned one guy away specifically that was drunk, and I remember Troy Bundy going, you just put a death sentence on that guy. It was the middle of a blizzard. The guy could hardly stand up, and he wanted to spend the night. I said, you're way too drunk. When you're sober, come back. And the guy, it was at night. It was dark. It was blizzard. And he wandered into the snowstorm. And Troy goes, that guy's dead meat. And I thought, I hope not.
Well, if he's drunk enough, he won't even know.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, if you got time for a quick little story on this one.
One more quick story, then Mike's going to wrap it up.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
The
guy, I thought, boy, if I ever see this guy again, he's going to hate me. He is going to want to kill me for what I just did to him. Well, about within a week, he shows up again. And he's happy. He's smiling. I'm going, whoa. And hey, how you doing? I'm back. And he's all happy. I'm just like a little taken back going, what happened? He says, I just kind of was blowing and snowing, and I came across a container that there was a door open in a 40-foot container with crab gear, fishing gear in it. And he said, I wandered into the container to get out of the storm and just fell on top of a pile of nets. And as soon as I did, the door shut. And there was two guys, they shut the door and they locked it. And he said, started screaming and yelling, but the storm was really blowing. And
they couldn't hear him.
Yelling and screaming. He says, I hear them shut the truck door. They started the truck and I hear them drive away. And they've just locked me in this 40-foot container that they, at that time of the year, they go back to Seattle for a few months, come back, for the next fishing season. It's like, and so he said he got a 2x4 and he's banging on the door, trying to get something to move. Nothing moves. And he said, I always thought I wanted to die. He was an Indian from Yakima, Washington.
All right.
He said, I always thought I just wanted to die to end my life. He said, well, I find out real fast, I don't want to die. I want to live. And he says, so for hours, he said he's doing what he can, but it's.
Who knows where they put it.
And he goes through, he says, I went through all kinds of emotions, came to the end of myself he was in there, he said about 10 hours, 10 or 12 hours. And finally he says, God, I just give you my life. I surrender.
Oh, wow.
Surrender to you. There's nothing left. And I just give my life to you. He said he went over to the door, put his hand on it, and it opened.
Wow.
And it's across the street from the Safeway. Chris knows where that is.
Yeah.
Across the street there. He said, I wandered over to Safeway. Went in there, sat down. They don't have chairs anymore because of COVID. But back then, you could go down and sit. And he said, I just sat there and looked out the window at that container, just like. So anyway, he told me, he says, I am totally sold out for God. I am so glad that happened.
Wow.
He spent maybe 2 weeks, just a wonderful guy, ended going back to Seattle and turned himself in because there's different warrants on him, and served a little bit of time, took care of that, and went to his community. I heard again when he was back in his community. He was doing church, doing great.
Oh,
So
that's
anyway,
awesome.
That was great.
Great story.
Great story. Mike, you got a final comment?
No final comments. I'm really thanks for doing this, John. I was a little hesitant about the whole religious thing. But it's really
I felt
been
the same way.
No, it's just encouraging. I think, you kind of get disconnected from a little bit, and it's just encouraging. So thanks a lot for doing this with us, John. We're going to continue. And I just, like I say, I love the stories, because I think we've all been there. You know what I mean? At different times, been low and high and all the different things. Not so much high. Yeah, high too. And, but anyway, just really cool. I really enjoy it. So thanks a lot. And so this is going to be airing when you guys watch this. We're going to be doing this every Sunday morning. Please, if you enjoy it, please like and subscribe. Put us a little note if anything kind of you want to comment on it. Please comment on it. It helps the algorithm, helps us get a little bit more exposure and subscribe, all that stuff. Thanks so much. Adios, amigos. Thanks,
Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Woohoo.
Bye bye.